But I think slowing down is one of the best things you can do to protect your reputation, and realizing we have thousands and thousands of followers. It's a big responsibility. You just have to slow down and think about every single angle. So I think that's important because it is so tempting to go fast.
I really agree with that, and experience the same thing. It's always going to take a little bit longer than I expect just to put one tweet out, especially when you're you're sharing live at an event or something like that, and maybe you have multiple responsibilities or roles at that event, because a lot of times social media managers wear multiple hats, as I'm sure most of you do. And so really planning and allotting that time and planning to take some time away from the action to really focus on what you're doing can save you from some heartache. I would also say that one of the beautiful things about social media is that people can enter or leave your conversation at any time. That's why we have a duty to provide them with great engaging content, and that's how we earn their interaction. And so with that, you never know when you're going to be making a first impression. So I think that's why it's important for us to remind ourselves to have a consistent voice, creating variety and dynamics in the type of content you're posting, but creating consistency in the tone you're using, or like the types of images or videos that you would use, so that whenever you're making that one person's first impression, they're still a part of that same story. I would also say something that's a little bit challenging, but that I've learned over the past couple years, is to really stay in touch with the other people in my organization, to keep an eye and ear out for what they're doing, because that will allow me to have a better idea of when we're going to have more eyes and ears on our social presence. So you can kind of load it with really good content and a lot of it, so that when maybe 100 people might be logging on to look you up, they're going to get that good first impression.
Yeah, I'm tagging along to what Sarah just said. Even though we appear to be a small museum, we have a really large underbelly. We have a curator of malacology, so that's freshwater mussels. We have several archaeologists. We have a paleo-ethnobotanist full-time on staff. We have this really insane archaeology lab with state-of-the-art equipment. I'm not a malacologist, a paleo-ethnobotanist, or an archaeologist. So for me, so much of my work, the first and most critical step is research. We are all learning institutions. Our primary duty is to educate anyone who engages with us online. But then, the fun part is, how do you make that research fun? A 6 million year old rock is interesting, but what about it contextually? And so for me, how I kind of transform this kind of research and knowledge that I build, and how I kind of turn it to life, is through collaboration. And I think for me at the museum, that's what we really strive to do. We work with so many organizations, almost every single UT department that's out there. We really have such a great network of partners and collaborators. And that's what turns the museum from a static place, seemingly, to a really, really dynamic place. So when I'm posting, sometimes it is a scholarly article, and it can seem dry, and so that is when I go to the person who wrote it and I say, like, what excites you about this? And what about this is so compelling? So really taking the time to go to our other team members and get that passion. So even if it's a drier piece of content, you can always kind of enliven it a little bit by working with other people.
Yeah, I just echo what Mary said too about good grammar and post with no spelling errors on it. That speaks volumes about. It's you think it would be minor, but I think it just takes a knock on your credibility if you see a organization that has sloppy social media posts. So I think just be really careful when you're posting, because I don't know. I've definitely, just in my personal consumption of social media, seen some posts like that and thought, like, I don't know if this is really worth my time, or to revisit those pages. but yeah, and then I think, yeah, to keep them engaged, varied content, is, like they were saying, that's a big thing of it, because, you don't want to just have people coming back to the same thing, you want to mix it up. Try to think of, how can I make this content exciting? And especially with the lab, a lot of, not all of the folks who follow us, they're not all scientists, they're not all researchers, and, they're coming to our page to see what they can learn about the lab that's a little, that's a little more relatable. So we try to, have like Q&As with researchers, like do like Facebook Live events, and, take them to places that, they would not necessarily see, or have the opportunity to see in their daily lives, like, take them into the world's fastest supercomputer, show them what that looks like and, sounds like, because it's very loud. And,
I didn't know that. That's crazy. Yeah.
Titan was louder, but Summit's still pretty loud. But show them what a 3D printer, looks like. It's just, I think, when you can vary that content and also give people an experience that they wouldn't have otherwise, I think that's when people are like, okay, I want to come back to this page, but I also want to share the content on this page. Because, people can give your post likes, but, when they actually actively share it and think that content's worthwhile to, share to their network, that's really the goal and what we want from our posts.
Thank you. So social media, I think, as we've established, is a great way to reach people. However, some institutions, such as small libraries or other information groups, may have little to no budget for social media marketing. Can you suggest a few ways that they can get the best use of scarce resources?
I thought about this as social media doesn't take a huge budget anyway, but if you have the time to go out and see what people are saying out there, and sometimes they'll ask a question as a librarian, you can chime in and say, hey, the library has this resource that will address their questions out there. So you're actively going out to the people who follow you. They're posting their stuff, and you can respond to them with, that's how you can get additional people, is going straight to the folks out there, not waiting for them to come to you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the hashtags and the cross posting and pulling other organizations in always expands your reach.
It kind of makes me think of the collaboration point that Zack had, how it's so important to use all the tools in your toolkit to get your outreach out there. So that's wonderful.
Yeah. And I'll add that I know a lot of people who manage social media pages are under a tight budget, and that goes for dollars and hours and more. So I've seen a lot of people do amazing work with limited resources, and one great way that I'm sure many of you already know about is that there are lots of free softwares available that help you plan and schedule your posts and monitor them and track the successes of them, and that can help you report on that as well. But also, people like social media. It's fun. So there are opportunities to ask people to have volunteer roles in content creation or brainstorming or helping you write out posts and things like that. Especially in a situation that I'm in, I'm lucky to have students right at my fingertips. So that's an opportunity that I'm looking forward to working with some students and some volunteers there. But another way to do that, which is really exciting for people, is to do takeovers, where you can build trust with someone that may be part of your organization and allow them to log into the account for a day, or you can put that on a regular schedule to where it takes a little bit of the the boots on the ground work off of your load, and just allows your audience to see some fresh faces and some different perspectives. So with that, you can also build teams of ambassadors that you can rotate between, so you can build up some familiar faces as well, that other than the actual manager of the account. And then I think one great thing to do is to create your content in a way that's evergreen or adaptable or reusable, so that when you see that people like what you're sharing, you can share it again. Chances are you're not going to be reaching the same people every time, and so just keep that in mind when you're writing something or taking photo or video, and try and schedule it again for next year. And then something, I actually just came back from a conference, and something we discussed was people's use of Facebook and how a lot of people are navigating to groups more than, using the thread as much. And so maybe fostering some groups within Facebook and other platforms that are kind of self-sustaining, just kind of helping people discover communities that have the same interests that are related to your organization, but that are going to be interacting with each other rather than you having to constantly feed the conversation. I think sometimes that gives you the opportunity to plop things in here and there that are of interest to them, but they're naturally going to be responding to each other and keeping that conversation alive too.
I think my background, just briefly, right before I was at McClung Museum, I worked at AC Entertainment, so a private entertainment company. I personally worked on 6 different music festivals, so I had a huge budget every year. I mean, really, we had video teams on site from 6 a.m. until midnight every single day. I had like an army of people, at every single one of these events. And now I'm at the museum, which is a 501c3, and we don't very often have the ability to get a videography team. So I'm our videographer. I'm the one who edits that. We do have a photographer on staff, which is great, but I still supplement. So my biggest piece of advice in terms of how to kind of deal with these scarce resources and still get something that's really crisp and professional and compelling, ultimately, is really taking the time to invest in your own artistic development. Especially to any current students who are out here, there's so many free resources to learn Photoshop super well and have some instruction, to learn video editing software, audio editing software. All of those things are going to make your $0 production budget look so professional and crisp. So that, for me, was kind of the biggest learning curve, is I was like, oh, I'm a videographer now, all of a sudden, which is the fun part of the job. And speaking to Sarah's point and what I mentioned earlier about collaboration, I think it's really easy sometimes to forget that our digital audiences, oftentimes the crossover between them and our IRL, in real life audiences, is so the same, especially at the museum. We have a membership program, and our most engaged followers, I see their names and I'm like, yeah, you're a museum member, thank you. But, so I think it's really important to remember those tie-ins, personal interaction costs nothing. Showing up to other people's events and other museums' events around town costs nothing, but that does ultimately tie into our digital audience and the way that people respond and think about the brand and the organization.
So, to echo what Zach was saying, I've pretty much always been a one-man band when it comes to managing social media channels. So I worked at UT in the College of Engineering for electrical engineering, computer science, and so I launched their social site, so it was Facebook and Twitter, and then after that I worked at the Knoxville Chamber of Commerce and ran their social network. And then at ORNL, even though we're a big place, we do have a pretty tight media operation, so I'm primarily the one running social. So I've always had to kind of figure out, how do we do this? Because I think some people are a little surprised, especially with the lab, it's like that we don't have a huge team.
An army,
folks.
right?
Yeah. And so I picked up video editing when I worked at the New Sentinel, and just really loved that and kind of latched onto that as a great way of storytelling. And so kind of how I've always done social media is I've always wanted to make videos to post on the social sites that I've managed. So actually, when I was hired by ORNL, it was just to do digital media, just social media, and they actually didn't find out until about a month or 2 after I was hired that I was a video editor. So anyway, needless to say, I got some equipment pretty quickly, and then that's been a huge part of my job so far, or since then. So I think if you can just make yourself very versatile and like I said, be a jack of all trades. If you are managing social alone, I think that can be really helpful, because I think you can fool a lot of people into thinking like we have a lot more people doing this than we do, and we really don't. So, and then for when you can't be very hands-on, because sometimes I'll be filming, I'll be around the lab filming, or I'll be deep editing mode on a video, and I can't be on Twitter or Facebook all the time. that I do use a lot of scheduling tools for that because you know, it helps me appear to be there when I when I'm not physically just, you know, being able to post natively. So yeah, scheduling is a wonderful tool, and I think a lot of people don't. We have a lot of secondary accounts at the lab, so they represent, you know, smaller groups and more niche interests, and so, you know, that's a good thing. We want, because the main account, like, it's such a broad, there's such a broad spectrum of research that goes on that, you know, we don't want to focus on one area too much. So we like that those sub accounts have those, you know, platforms. But sometimes it's kind of hard to convey like how important scheduling is to them. And they're like, well, I just don't have the time. And I'm like, well, I know you don't have the time, but take, you know, because you're only one person, but take 30 minutes, schedule 10 posts for the next, you know, 10 days, at least maybe have one thing going on a day. And it's like, and that's, you know, all it takes right there. You're covered for the next bit. And then you can post, you know, as stuff comes up and you have time. And I also, a lot of folks wonder too, like, okay, I have limited resources and not enough time to post, but I'm also a little bit strapped for content. You know, we all have slow news days and weeks that not a lot are going on, but you know, that doesn't mean you should post any less. I think with scheduling, you know, you can repost, you know, more recent news stories, or evergreen content is always wonderful. So you can go back and kind of pepper those in, you know, to your scheduling time. Because yeah, I mean, if you're following like, you know, 300 people, the chances someone saw my post at like, you know, 3:15 one day, like, you know, are probably very slim to none. So, you know, if I posted the same thing again later, you know, my chances go up that someone else sees it. So I think, yeah, reposting and scheduling is very, very valuable. And I think sometimes it's a little undervalued.
All good points. Thank you for that. So I think we've covered this a little bit, but maybe we can get a little bit more information. What are one or two best practices that social media specialists in an information setting should be aware of?
So, do you mind if I jump in on that one? So this seems really simple, but just, you know, check the hashtags and account tags that you're using. You would not believe, you know, what you maybe think this hashtag means probably doesn't mean what the rest of the world means, and especially being in the government realm, we love acronyms, and I have to always tell people that I promise you, like, what your, you know, program acronym is, like, you know, in this little small sphere, probably doesn't mean that across Twitter. And one of our secondary accounts had been tagging this DOE program, hashtagging it. And I was just like, there's no way this is like a legit hashtag for this. So I checked it, and sure enough, it was like for a Korean boy band. That's like what the most popular iteration of it was. So I told them, probably let's just not go there, because yeah, it's not going to get the pickup you want anyway, you know. But it's also not going to mean what you think it does. And then the other thing was, one of our accounts had tagged at DOE, which you would think, okay, at the Department of Energy, is their Twitter account handle? Well, it's not. It's actually at Energy. So DOE turns out to be a woman named Doris, who apparently just beat DOE to the punch in 2008 to get their account. So anyway, she cornered that. She does not tweet, by the way. But anyway, so yeah, that's always just kind of fascinating to me, that, you know, just be accurate on, you make sure, just do a quick Google search, you know, it won't take much more time, and it'll, you know, save you from some embarrassment.
I think the two best practices that I always drill into my interns are definitely my personal weak points in the field. The most important one, of course, is reporting. I mean, it's just so important. It's how we keep our jobs, it's how we grow our careers, and it's how you can tell if what you're doing is successful. So I mean, at the end of every week, going through and really kind of drilling down and looking at what was the most successful, and there's so much information that you can gather now through, you know, I mean, Google Analytics, through all of the native analytics platforms. It's so important to do that, and it's hard sometimes to make time for it. And then, oh my gosh, I totally forgot my other point, because I'm just really bad at reporting as regularly as I should.
You embarrassed yourself.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so critically important. And really, especially if you're an intern or volunteering, those numbers and conversations are what will get you a job in the field. You know, when I even interview people for internships or for different positions on boards that I'm on, you know, I like to hear people say, like, this was how much engagement we got, or like this many people, or this type of growth. Having those figures readily available is really going to set you apart in the field, you know, because a lot of people can make a great video, but, you know, it looks great, but did it resonate, you know, and how did it resonate? And it is just so important to kind of, you know, more from the creative side of like creating this content to really drilling down and breaking into how effective it was.
I agree with you, Zach, and I think a lot of people would agree that the analytics are really important, but also maybe not the most fun thing to do. So having the discipline for that is, you know, you have to make a deliberate choice to stand out in that. But I would say that it's really important working in information to try and familiarize yourself as much as you can with the best practices and laws for the information that you're sharing, like the images and, you know, the way you quote people and attribute things. I think, you know, we're all going to make mistakes, and you can always apologize, but I think representing an information organization, we should try to lead the way in that on the social media platforms, because I think a lot of times people just think they're excused on social media because it's a more casual forum, but we can set a good example on best practices for sharing information and attributing properly, and, you know, knowing what copyright's all about and things like that. And then just, I think also, if I don't come from an information science background in my career, I'm more focused on public relations and communications and marketing, and so just having a listening ear and learning from the faculty librarians at the UT libraries about, you know, their stances on those things, because they're the experts. That's been a great opportunity for me to develop myself professionally and to kind of bring that into the social media world.
I, you know, ditto everyone up here. And I'd say the other thing that I think is really important is responding. So when we get messages or we get comments or questions, I think it's important to, you know, respond back. And there's an awful lot of people who have the automatic response. And, you know, that's a good first start, but it's not enough. You really do have to, converse. Social media is not a one-way communication. It is a conversant communication, and it's easy for us to fall into social media as a way to get the word out there. So when we're strapped for time and we've got a bunch of events out there, we'll make our event pages and we'll get them out there, and we've got a gazillion posts. But that's not the same as using social media the way it can be used as a two-way communication. See, and sometimes we got into a little bit of trouble with somebody who misunderstood, or we got in sideways, and they, you know, they'll let you know on social media, which you've got to respond to that right away. And sometimes I prefer to bring them in and talk to them face to face. It is such an easy, in this culture, in today's culture, where, you know, you forget that there are real life people behind the social media posts, that you can.
And we're nice.
Yeah, but people slam you if. We don't get that too often at the library, but we made a decision that somebody didn't like. So instead of hashing it out on social media, I contacted them and said, come in and let's talk face to face. Because, you know, there are conversations that are good to have on social media, but there are also really good conversations to have face to face. And if you're lucky enough to be in a place where your audience is local, then that's a chance to foster a face to face communication. And that one situation worked out beautifully. Now they're singing our praises on social media. But I do think responding and conversing is a best practice that's easy to get away from. You know, away from me anyway. I just want to get the word, you know, come to our event, use our resources. You know, so I want it from them, but I have to take the time to two-way street the conversation.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because that was my second point. and weakness.
Yay, I'm glad you forgot it, so I can say something.
I think that was a great point about the response, them singing your praises now, because I've heard that from multiple people, that negativity on social media is the best opportunity for you to change their mind, and just that opportunity for you to serve them and either help them understand what's going on, or just, you know, responding in a nice way and letting them know that you care about their feedback. That can totally transform the way that they feel about your organization, just because they feel heard and cared about. And then they are typically the more passionate, vocal people, so
Right, right.
it works out to your advantage.
Yeah, that's actually, that I've seen that happen in my own life, in my own past career, so it's funny to see that play out with libraries too. And these were all really good best practices, and my big takeaway was definitely the idea that social media is a conversation. It's not just a one-way street. And also, just as important, if you want to talk to DOE, make sure you're not tweeting at Doris. Eventually, she might get upset.
She's learned a lot, though.
I'm sure it's entertaining.
Yeah.
So.
So think of a social media post or campaign that you consider to be the most successful of your career. Why was it so successful?
Well, I've got a crazy outlier one. Just working at AC Entertainment, you know, I had an opportunity to work on really, really enormous events. And last year we launched, when I was still with AC, Moon River Music Festival in Chattanooga. And it ended up, you know, we announced on a Tuesday and tickets went on sale on Thursday. And we sold out in 8 hours, which was insane. And I made a joking bet that I was like, I think that we're gonna sell out, you know, before the day is over. And everyone said no, and I was supposed to get a free trip to Vegas if I was right, which I was, but still waiting on the Vegas trip.
Oh.
But you know, what was so powerful about that post in particular was, one, our branding was really, really on point, and everyone on our team had equal buy-in, you know, and we were working directly with the artist team as well. So it was really collaborative, and it took a ton of edits to get to the point where we were all happy with it, but no one kind of let anything slide, you know, like we were moving things over, you know, like less than half, 2 pixels. I mean, really, you know, to get everything just right. And then beyond that, it was, you know, our overall marketing plan, because, you know, we were working with a list of high-profile artists, and, you know, being the point person for all of their communicators was insane. But we were able to kind of coordinate this plan where we announced it exactly at 10, and then between 10 and 10:30, every single artist who was involved also shared it with individually tracked links, which was also crazy to make and is very important to do if you can. But I mean, that one was just insane, because not only did we really get some great data afterwards, because we were intentional about how we were tracking every link per artist, but also, you know, the branding was there, the excitement was there, and then getting everyone on the same page to just launch it all at once. And I mean, it worked like a charm. It was so awesome. I thought I was gonna have to be trying to sell those tickets for months, and then, you know, my job just got that much easier because we took the time on the front end to be so intentional about that. And that's what's so important about taking the time on the front end, is it can save you so much work and you don't even realize it.
So I would say, well, since I've been at the lab, I've had the experience of getting to be there for some really cool announcements and really exciting news. So we had, I guess just a couple months after I started, and this was one of my first videos that I did, was ORNL announced the restart of their production of plutonium-238, which NASA uses to fuel deep space missions. So that was really neat to get to be on, you know, in on that one and on the posts and the videos for it. But then we also had, about a year later, the announcement of the provisional name of Element 117, which ORNL and UT helped co-discover, and it is known as Tennessine. So should be everyone's,
I remember that.
yeah, it should be everyone's favorite element in the state of Tennessee. But I think my favorite, though, was this past summer, and it was probably the most involved social campaign that I've done with a big announcement, was when our supercomputer summit came online. And so, and it is the fastest supercomputer in the world, and it's holding strong at #1. So, but we had a huge event for that. Secretary of Energy Rick Perry came to the lab, and we had a big ceremony where they signed the computer. And so we wanted to make sure we, you know, captured this right, because it's, you know, only going to happen once. So I set up a live stream on Facebook and Twitter to live stream Secretary Perry's remarks, and as well as our laboratory director and Governor Haslam. And so while that was going on, I was live tweeting it on our Twitter account. And then we had a a video that I had put together that went out later that day. The DOE also used, and then also the press release was posted. So it was just like a huge blitz on social media of just like every form of communication you could think of that we put out that day. And then that content did really well on its own just over the next few days, but I think about a week later I followed all of that up with a Facebook live tour of Summit with the facilities manager, and he explained all the tech of it, and and got to have that two-way communication with our audience, and got so many questions. And we have such wonderful research staff, and that they'll actually go after the event is over and answer questions to the public. So that's just wonderful. I love that we get that buy-in not only from the public because they want to watch it, but from our staff who are just fantastic about wanting to engage.
I guess I'll add a little bit of humor here. One of my
Chris is so good. I know what you're going to say.
he knows what I'm talking about. Must be good. So one of my favorite and most successful posts here with the UT libraries was soon after I started here. And if any of you have been to the Hodges Library, you have experienced our very heavy doors. They're very hard to open.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so good.
So, yeah, you felt it, right?
Yes.
It crushed you.
And I remember the post.
Yeah, good. So, yeah, I just made a fun, short little video where I stood in front of the doors discreetly, filming people getting squished by the doors. So, it's something, I put it all together and just like talked about how people are working on their style getting through the doors. And, yeah, it got, tens of thousands of views and on all of our platforms, and lots of comments and tons of shares, and I thought it was really cool that the local media picked it up just based off of how much it was shared on social. And then so it really is cool when it translates from one medium to another naturally. And then also we had people asking us and talking about it out in public, not knowing that I had posted it, and so it was just fun hearing people talking about it. So as far as numbers go and engagement goes, that was one of our most popular and fun posts. And I think the reason for it was because the topic was so relatable. Everyone had experienced that. No matter who you are or how strong you are, it's still hard to open. And I think everybody kind of feels embarrassed when that happens a little bit, and like they're on their own, like they're the only one that it's happening to, but they got to see it happening to everyone. And so, people were commenting saying, oh, was this not me the other day, and tagging their friends and sharing it with people, that had graduated 10 years ago that were so glad we were getting new doors. And so the purpose of this post and the reason I brought up this kind of irritating thing was because we were about to replace them for sliding doors, which were going to be a breeze to walk through, which you can walk over and experience today if you'd like to. Sorry, online audience. You'll just have to make a visit. But yeah, I think it was because it was that element of relatability and also kind of giving people the opportunity to gripe a little bit, and just all in good fun. And then people actually saw themselves in the video or their friends and got to tag them and surprise someone was watching.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really liked that one. And then another one kind of to contrast that, I really just liked the quality of conversation that stemmed from a photo that I posted on Instagram just of several guys together studying and working on their math homework together. And we made a fun little joke like, hey mom, and they allowed me to tag them in the photos. And so mom actually chimed in comments, super excited to see her son studying in the library, and then tags her family friend who also chimes in, and they're kind of picking on him. And so that gave me the opportunity to also participate in that conversation and connect with a parent and a student and a family friend, and just let them know that our communication, we try to be as personal as we can, and that we care, and that we support what they're doing. So those were just two kind of highlights on opposite ends of the spectrum.
So the post that we made that totally took me aback, and it probably shouldn't have, is we do movies on Market Square. We show free movies every fall on Market Square, and we do a public vote. Well, last year I think it was the movie that won. One of the movies that won was Hocus Pocus, and somehow I missed Hocus Pocus coming along. I had never even heard of the movie. Or if I had it, I can't believe I missed Hocus Pocus. So when we announced that Hocus Pocus was the movie, the internet blew up. And I was like,
you had no idea why?
I had no idea, yeah. It was, oh my gosh, we had, and that also told me that we needed to get reinforcements at the on Market Square. Because literally, I think the number of people who liked it, it's like 400,000 people, and I was terrified. I was like, "Oh my God,
What if they all show up?
Yeah, and it was the biggest crowd we have ever seen on Market Square, bigger than any of the Sundown in the cities. I used to work for AC Entertainment, and I was there when Steve Winwood was there, and this would rival Steve Winwood. It was huge. People were in the trees. They were behind the screen watching it backwards, but I would not have known that if I hadn't seen all the shares and all the likes, and it was literally, it was wall to wall all the way out to Crouch Park.
I think I walked past and saw people watching it from behind the screen.
They were dripping. I mean, yeah, it was crazy. So it was a Halloween movie, yeah, and it was adorable. I now get why Hocus Pocus was the movie.
Did people dress up?
They did. I think I even dressed up because I got it. but the one that we did recently that I just really loved, and I don't know that it garnered a huge audience, but WVLT called us and said, we want to do live book recommendations. So we did WVLT initiated it, and we had a librarian that you could just write in and say, hey, I like historical fiction. Give me a book rec. So the librarian would respond back and forth. And I was surprised at how many people wrote in and, responded to that one. I thought that was something that we should continue to do. Yeah. And the other thing that we've done several times, and they're the things that just kind of are the quick, we did a blind date with a book, and I just snapped a picture of it and said, hey, take a chance on love. And, try, if the books are wrapped up and you get a hint as to what it is. And this was for Valentine's. So you come and you check out a book that you don't know what it is. It's just taking a chance. So I snapped it and I threw it up on Facebook. And within seconds, one of the TV stations came out and did a whole segment on it. So that's where, you're just kind of surprised by what these little kind of quick little flippant things that can really be picked up. And I love the idea of the really strategic, plan it out and all that.
We're from Oak Ridge, okay? Well, I will say, I do love that you guys brought that up because so many posts are those spontaneous, quick things that really rely on your ability to listen and be aware of what's happening. I mean, especially, in the places, well, Orionell's a little different, but, we have a lot of foot traffic and children and families and people from, all different walks of life coming through the museum. So I try every day to just actually walk through the museum, where I'm at every day to see what's happening and how people are interacting with things. And you'd be surprised at the content that you can find that requires no orchestration, and that really does resonate because people see themselves in it,
I agree, because no matter how much you try to listen to your colleagues and stay ahead of the plan and figure out what's on the calendar, you're never going to know everything. And so I think making intentional choices, I alter the way I walk through the library because we have so many floors. So sometimes I'll just stop into places where I wouldn't normally be or sit in on informative presentations by our faculty that I wouldn't normally attend, just so I can kind of keep an eye and ear out for those things that are coming up or that pop up randomly.
And that's, with the libraries, well, I guess with all of us, really, our subject matter is so varied. We go from genealogical history, to children's, to, vintage photography. And there is something all the time that will address any audience, and I have to keep that balance in mind. Children, adults, genealogical research, you do. We have the resources there to kind of keep it varied. But it's hard to resist the children.
It's fun.
That's a heartstring,
Great.
Many libraries and museums are nonprofit organizations which require some amount of public fundraising. And in the same way, a government entity, they might not have to do any fundraising, but they might try to use social media to increase awareness and support of their organization and the initiatives that they're doing. Can you share a time, or can you imagine a time where you created a compelling post or campaign which led you to fund or support raising success?
Yeah, I had one really recently. It was my first big campaign at the museum. There's one day on campus every year called Big Orange Give, if you're not familiar, and it's a campus-wide fundraising initiative. Every department is challenged with setting a personal goal, and the museum had never done it before. Like we did, we raise money every day. We're a nonprofit, so that's always kind of on our minds. But this is the first year that we participated in Big Orange Give, and we set a goal of $12,000, which I felt confident that we could hit, but was also kind of nervous about it being my first big campaign and not really knowing exactly who our audience was. I mean, I'd only been working there for about 3 months at the time, so I was still kind of getting my bearings. But we put together this great kind of informative campaign that was based off of, how those dollars really do impact and affect not only the lives of the people who we serve, but also our staff members, because, a lot of our staff members are funded off of the money that we raise. And also talking about, our educational outreach, our K-12 programs, our academic programs. And the campaign was really well received. And the day of, again, I did some kind of behind the scenes marketing where I contacted all of our members and made sure that everyone had links and that everyone knew when the post was up. And when the post was up, I copied that link and I sent it, and I was like, send this to whoever, share it. But we ended up, it was the first time that I'd given a lecture was that morning. So I set everything up, did my lecture at the museum, and I ran back to my computer to see, if anything was happening. And over that 1 hour period, we had raised $11,000 already of our goal. And by the end of the day, we raised a little over $30,000 in that one day, which, I was just, I don't know how to recreate it, to be honest. I'm still breaking into those numbers and trying to figure out what it was exactly that worked. But it was insane. And it was so great to see how generous people are. And it's just, it boils down to education. People have a soft spot for the museum, but they don't necessarily know how many students we serve, that we're the only Spanish language program at a museum in the state almost. We have a lot of things that we offer that just up until my role, which is the first person to have it, just weren't really publicized enough.
Well, one of the programs we have at the public library is the Imagination Library here in Knox County. And honestly, you summons Dolly Parton and everything goes rainbowy and beautiful. It's so we have used it quite a bit for to help people become aware that we do have to raise the money for the books locally. She has done an amazing job on the infrastructure and the marketing side, but every community has to have skin in the game. So a lot of people think Dolly has raised all the money for the books, and she's done amazing stuff, but we still have to do that. So that is one of the biggest things that we use it for in fundraising, is the Imagination Library. We also use it to honor our sponsors. So we'll do Children's Festival Reading, Movies on Market Square, The Big Read, all these other folks who give us money, and it's really a good chance to thank them publicly. So not, we get our money through grants, but that's a chance to really honor them.
And I'll add a little bit of something different as far as what we're asking for sometimes. One of my favorite things to highlight at the UT libraries is our rare and unique items in our Betsy B. Creekmore Special Collections and University Archives. Got it right the first time.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, so we have some really cool, really old stuff, and it's super visual. There are things you can check out to look at in our reading room and our special collections, and a lot of those things come from donations from folks in our area because we're preserving local history. And so when I share about those things, which make great social content, I also try to remind people that some of these are donated from local families or local organizations, and they're priceless pieces that we now get to preserve for perpetuity, and that comes from the generosity of the folks who are entrusting it to us. So, we also use our social pages to promote some events related to our donors that can be open to the public as well. So that creates a little bit of awareness when we draw them in and allow them to participate in those things as well, and hopefully spark their interest in supporting the libraries in other ways. But yeah, I think that's a little bit interesting how we can, show off the first edition signed copy of a book, and also share that, this may have come from a donor, and that could be you. Do you have cool things in your attic?
So for ORNL on this one, it's a little different, since we're federally funded. So for us, it's more like we're showing the taxpayers, like, these are where your dollars are going to. And, this is the really cool, cutting edge research that we're doing here. So that's how I would answer this one.
Great, thank you. So this is something that I think the five of us talked a little bit about before we got up here, but 15 years ago, most of social media didn't exist. And today, most 15-year-olds have a social media network. Do you have one or two ideas on how our social media network can stand out from the pack? And this can be something that you've already raised and just want to reinforce, or it can be a new idea too.
So I think, it just goes back to having really creative content. I think there's so much out there, and there can be so much noise that you really just have to stand out from the pack. And sometimes, you just have to really get creative and clever with how you're going to do that. So, with being a big science laboratory, people might not think that's that fascinating, or there's anything, they might think it's fascinating, but they might not understand it or think it's too complex. But I try to find ways where we can kind of take people a little bit by surprise in what we put out, and thinking like, I can't believe a national laboratory did that. Like recently, I kind of jumped on the trend of the unsciencing something. I don't know if you all saw that on Twitter, but people were like unsciencing animals, and they'd have like, a picture of an animal and just have like hilarious like terms pointing to like, the limbs and ears and things like that. And so I decided to unscience a supercomputer. And so I worked with our folks who are the communications folks for Summit and for our computing resources, and came up with some fun things. So we had like tech spaghetti for like some of the wires, and like
saw that one. I was thinking that in my head.
And it was like the fans in the door, like the whoosh whoosh fans, So it's like we had a lot of fun with it, and I posted it. And it was just silly, but it I posted it with also a legit link to learn more about Summit, because we don't want it to be frivolous, at all either. But I posted it and came back to it like a couple minutes later, and it already had 65 likes, and I was like, whoa. And then I think it has like well over 400 and has been seen by over 50,000. It was just like unexpected. But I also think people thought it was a little unexpected of a national lab to jump on something so silly. But like I said, we try to put some substance with things like that. A couple examples of doing something a little out of the norm. We have a lot of serious communications with our videos and press releases, but I also started a series recently thinking about it was around the holidays, thinking about people, being stressed or things like that. I started a series called Soothing Science, and I had shot some things in slow motion, like just different, one was one 3D printing technique where there's basically it looks like a lot of sand. It looks like a Zen garden that you have to brush away the sand to get to the object.
Sounds nice.
And it just when I saw the video, I was like, this is so nice. And I was like, wait a minute, we could put a hilarious kind of Zen sounding track behind it and call it Soothing Science. And anyway, TheVerge.com, they picked up on it and ended up doing a story with our researcher about that type of 3D printing. So, it's just something that's a little silly, but it's also, it can get people's attention and just not be what you expect from, a serious organization.
I think I saw one of those as well.
Yeah.
Is there one with beading?
Yes, there's super hydrophobic materials. So
Yes.
you have falling off.
I saw that one too.
I think that was the first one I did, and because I had gotten a new camera and I was playing with slow mo, and I was like, this is amazing.
It was awesome.
And there's a shape shifting material. We have another one coming out very soon. So follow at ORNL.
And I will totally second that. I think it's really easy to take ourselves too seriously sometimes, because it is what we think about and do day to day. And, you know, we do work for research institutions, and a lot of what we do is really serious, and your work like saves lives. You know, I enrich lives usually. I don't often save them, but I always enrich them. But it is really important to remember why most people are getting on social media at all. Like, it's definitely a tool, and it's definitely a way to find directions or see if the restaurant's open. But ultimately, it is for entertainment, and you know, that's something that we have to remember to offer. And being off the cuff and genuine and candid, you know, makes people feel warmly towards an organization that maybe otherwise they might think of as sterile or dry or boring, when it's, you know, not any of those things. You know, there are people inside of all of these, you know, monolithic buildings. You know, I think the one big one that I was really excited about is there was a, a Tangerine article about the museum that, like, the curatorial staff was taken over by a flock of birds, and like they like had quotes from the birds about what their plans were for the museum. But what's really awesome is that we have the full collection of Audubon prints. So birds is something that we really do have a lot of, and we have all these like Audubon bird plush toys in the museum. You know, so I got to kind of respond, and I was like, "You're right." Meet the curatorial staff, and made this video of like walking by all these like little different birds, and you know, people got to see that the museum, you know, one, that there's a person behind it, that there's a sense of humor, but you know, just so different from what I would usually think to post necessarily, because we do have, like you guys, so many objects and things that are so interesting, but you know, not living. You know, I mean.
And I don't know if like when you did your posts like that, like when you do kind of these little unconventional posts and things like that, you do, I think, hit the relatability factor. People are like, okay, like, well, on the Unscience of Supercomputer, a lot of the folks were like, okay, these are terms I can actually understand, because I have no idea what a supercomputer is, much less what's in the cabinet. But I also, when we have posts like that, I see like such a spike in our followers, you know, for the day. And so it's like you've tapped into a whole new audience that, you know, didn't either know who you were, or, you know, maybe knew who you were but weren't following you, and now they have a whole new reason to kind of, you know, jump on and see what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, making it accessible too, you know, is the big trick, because we are places that can be scary. You know, I mean, your research, our research, your guys's, I mean, you know, that many books in one room, like it can be intimidating. So it is so important to really illustrate like the accessibility of all of our different.
Well, and to your point, the 15-year-olds are really into videos. I mean, they like videos, so the more visual it is, the more movement there is in it, the better. And the one that we did recently that I thought was just so clever, I didn't have that much to do with it, so I can say that, but we did a spoof on Grease for Summer Library Club. There was a friend of the library rewrote the words to Summer Loving.
Summer reading? Is that?
Yeah, it was hysterical. So we made this whole music video on that Summer Loving, Summer Reading, and it was hysterical, funny, unexpected, and that's the kind of thing that is more accessible, makes us more relatable, so the youth will come see us more. The youth. So that was one of my favorite ones. But you have to incorporate pop culture and you know, movement and the things that
let loose. Let loose.
Let loose. Yeah.
I think that's one reason why it's important to create and maintain relationships with other social media managers, because a lot of us operate solo in larger organizations, and sometimes you can kind of get pressure to take yourself more seriously than you should on a social media platform from colleagues, you know, who are doing the serious work. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely a serious aspect of planning this communication, but also just keeping in mind why people are there, like you said, and that doing our best job is to be silly sometimes.
Yeah.
And so having the support of other social media managers that understand that although you are having fun doing it, it is still the best work.
When so much work still goes into being silly, that's what people, you know, don't necessarily realize. Like, to be silly does take us that extra effort. It takes more time sometimes
Creativity.
than
Yeah.
making just like a dry educational post. You know?
And humor wins. I mean, look at the Super Bowl commercials. The most funniest ones always win. So if you want an audience and you can pull off humor, humor's tough though. You can really insult people with humor as much as you can draw them in. So you have to be very careful about your humor, but humor wins.
So going back to your question, I would say that it's really just important to go back to responsiveness. I think it's really important that you are there answering questions for people or responding to their comments, interacting within limits. I think that's an issue that social media managers can have sometimes too, is not knowing when to set a boundary if you are working solo. There's a difference between being prompt and responding and feeding bad habits of, texting in the middle of the night when everyone should be asleep.
Right.
So we can be a really good, healthy presence on social media and provide people with really valuable information and valuable interaction. I think social media gets a bad rap sometimes, and as people are studying it more, you hear both sides of the story. But I think it's our job to just play into that role in a very positive way and enhance people's time that they're spending on there. And really, by doing that, we can show that we care about our students, about our faculty and staff in those one-on-one interactions. And I think a great way to do that is to use people's names when you're responding, because you can see it right there. And then sometimes letting them know who you are. When I take something from a comment to a private conversation on social, I usually sign it with my name, Sarah from the libraries. So they know that if they need to get in touch with me or call me at my office, they are welcome to. I just think it really helps to put a personal touch on that. And that sounds very simple to kind of be personal with people, but it can be tough in practice. To put yourself out there like that. So I think it's always something to aspire towards.
That's what on our TripAdvisor account, which, typically if I'm responding, if it's a positive message, like, thank you so much. But, when we do get negative reviews, it is even more important to be so personable and so kind. And I always, if it's a negative review, I'm like, hi, it's Zack. Again, I'm a person behind this screen. Like, let's, we would love to know more about this problem. We hate that this happened. How can we fix it? It is so important to be responsive in that way.
Great, thank you. So we have spent a good amount of time talking about our organizations and our social media. So my last question for you asks, is there an information organization besides your own whose social media sites or campaigns stand out as something either that you admire or wish to emulate?
I'll jump in on this one. I absolutely love NASA's accounts, their main accounts, and then their associated sub-accounts. I mean, I think the person who gets to tweet is the Mars rover. I mean, it just has to have the most fun job, and then, the sign-off they gave, the Opportunity rover, I mean, it's hilarious. So, yeah, I just think the folks who run NASA's accounts must just have the best time. And I was at a conference and heard one of their social managers speaking once and was shocked that they actually only have 4 people managing their main account, which has millions of followers, but they have 700 secondary sub-accounts. And that just blows my mind of how do you, but they don't, I mean, they manage them, but they also are very hands-off with their management. And then I'm the amount of trust that takes to know that people are gonna, do well with your brand. But I mean, yeah, everything I've seen has been really fantastic.
Agreed. Second that.
Yeah.
I also really admire Burt's Bees, kind of in the way that they are customer focused, because I like to think of the people who are interacting with our accounts kind of like a customer service type of mentality, serving them first, making sure to offer them value and treating them well. And so I think they do a really good job of that on social media. They also have really great, colorful, diverse, intriguing imagery, but that kind of invites people to comment, and they get lots of positive and lots of negative feedback on there. And they just take it gracefully, and they respond well, and they show that they care, and they address people by name like we just talked about. And they have hundreds of comments on a normal post, just, I think, because that people know that they'll be responded to and feel special in that way. So I really admire that. And another one that my boss recently pointed out to me, so we could talk about some more ways to incorporate humor into our account, is the Lawrence, Kansas Police Department. I don't know if any of you have discovered their account, but it's kind of surprising, but especially that it's a police department, but they really harness and use humor really well. It's you will actually laugh out loud, not just LOL. And I think so far what I've seen, they do humor well without taking it too far. Which it can be hard to come up with off-the-cuff witty comments without, offending anyone. And so I think we can, I mean, you're always probably going to offend someone here and there, but I think they just kind of practice that well, and it's something to learn from.
I got to go with Neil Gaiman. I follow Neil Gaiman, and he is funny. He is smart. He is, I follow a lot of authors, and he's just fun to follow. I wonder how he ever writes all his books, because he's always on Twitter. He's just so accessible. You feel at the end of the day like you're his buddy.
Yeah.
And we're going to write a grant to get him here.
Yay. I think nationally and in the museum field, I love the Field Museum in Chicago. They also have a secondary account just for their T-Rex zoo, which is just really well done. And the way that they, bring their collections to life, and the way that they educate, and it's still so compelling. And I mean, I just can't imagine how big or how hardworking their team is if it's a small team, because I mean, they really are putting out so much great content every day. I mean, interviewing so many people on staff, great videos. I mean, I just wish I had like a team of interns to try to replicate some of the work that they've done. I think locally, Striped Light, which is a letterpress in town, they do it's my favorite account to follow. One, visually, it's always so stunning. It's personal. They, sign off. You can tell when it's Sarah. You can tell when it's Brian, the two owners of the shop. And they also are always right on the pulse of what's happening in the city. They, part of, their bread and butter is making posters for these events. But, anytime there's a kind of a protest or something national happening, it's like, letterpress isn't click, So, but I mean, they're on the presses, making something, posting it, and engaging with what's really relevant at the time. So it's this great illustration of like this very analog, old school, I mean, the first marketing, really, kind of parlayed into this kind of like quick social community. It's really awesome. You should check it out. Striped Light letterpress.
Striped Light.
Yeah, and their Instagram, I think, is striped_light. Yeah.
What was the first museum you mentioned?
Field Museum. Yeah, I saw it. It's awesome. Yeah, they do some. Oh, cool. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, it's hard to believe, but we are just about out of time. So I just want to thank the panel for coming and sharing some of your experience and wisdom with us. I also want to thank all of you for participating here and elsewhere, those who are watching online. And I hope that you use some of the information that you are coming across today and to go out and create your own content and to make a difference in your own way. So I think there's a lot of great things that we've learned and that we can use in our own lives. And I'm still really hesitant. I really would like to message Doris just to make sure she's still there, but maybe I'll just leave that alone. So thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Oh yeah, Netflix is pretty good too.
Thank you.